It was getting late. The glow of the monitor was the only light left in the room. The clock on the wall ticked steadily toward another sleepless morning. He didn't want to go to bed. Sleep meant dreams, and dreams meant facing whatever waited for him beneath the surface of his mind. Too often, the nights brought the same visitors, distorted figures lurking at the edges of his vision, whispering insults, laughing at his fears, following him through impossible landscapes that felt more real than waking life. Even after he opened his eyes, their voices seemed to linger. He pushed back from his desk. The room felt smaller than usual. Restless energy crawled beneath his skin. He rose from his chair and began to pace the apartment, tracing the same worn path from one wall to the other. The floorboards creaked beneath each step. Midnight slipped past. Then 1 o'clock. Still he walked, trying to outrun the dreams waiting for him. He paced back and forth across the room. The floorboards creaked beneath his feet as he traced the same path over and over again. Desk to door, door to bed, bed to desk. His thoughts refused to settle. The clock read 1:47 a.m. Then his monitor chimed. He froze. The sound was unexpected. Almost nobody messaged him anymore. Slowly, he turned toward the computer. A single notification blinked in the corner of the screen. You have been invited to join a server. He frowned. The sender's name was blank. No profile picture. No mutual contacts. Just an invitation link. Below it was a single line of text. You've been looking for answers. A chill ran through him. His cursor hovered over the notification. The server's name appeared. The Eye. For a moment, he considered closing the message and pretending he had never seen it. He decided to not click on the message. He stared at the invitation for several seconds before minimizing the window. Whatever it was, it could wait until tomorrow. It wasn't as though he had anything else planned. His only obligation was a morning appointment with his psychiatrist, a routine visit he had been dreading for weeks. Another hour spent explaining thoughts he could barely understand himself. Another hour of polite concern and adjusted prescriptions. The invitation remained hidden on the taskbar. The Eye. He tried not to think about it. A sudden sound from outside broke the silence. He turned toward the window. Across the street, a dark sedan sat motionless beneath a flickering street lamp. His eyes narrowed. The car hadn't been there a moment ago. For several seconds, it remained perfectly still. Then its headlights flashed on. The vehicle pulled away from the curb and disappeared into the darkness at the end of the street. He continued watching long after it was gone. The neighborhood was quiet again. Maybe it was nothing. A wrong turn. Someone checking an address. A delivery driver. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that the car had been waiting. Waiting for what, he didn't know. Slowly, he looked back toward the computer screen. The minimized notification still glowed faintly at the bottom of the monitor. The Eye. The psychiatrist's office looked exactly as it always had. The same beige walls, the same framed landscapes, the same faint smell of coffee and disinfectant. She sat across from him with a notebook resting on her lap. How have you been doing since our last appointment? He stared at the carpet. A few seconds passed, then a few more. Finally, he answered. Nothing. She waited. Nothing? He nodded. Absolutely nothing. The words hung in the air. No job, no friends, no hobbies beyond passing the endless hours in front of a screen. The days blurred together so completely that he often struggled to distinguish one from another. The psychiatrist scribbled something in her notebook. Have you thought about trying something new? He shrugged. Like what? It could be anything. She leaned forward slightly. A class, volunteering, a club, exercise, learning a skill, meeting new people. It doesn't matter what it is. He remained silent. I think you've become trapped inside a very small world, she continued. The longer you stay there, the harder it becomes to leave. He looked toward the window. Outside, people moved along the sidewalk with apparent purpose. They seemed to belong somewhere. He wasn't sure he did. "You don't need to transform your life overnight," she said. "Just do one thing that's uncomfortable. One thing that takes you outside your routine." He let out a quiet breath. One thing. It sounded simple, yet he couldn't remember the last time he had done something he hadn't done 100 times before. The appointment ended 20 minutes later. As he walked home through the gray afternoon, her words lingered in his mind. Do one thing that's uncomfortable. When he finally returned to his apartment, his computer screen flickered to life. A minimized notification still waited patiently at the bottom of the monitor. Invitation pending, the eye. For the first time, he wondered whether clicking it might count. The apartment felt smaller than usual. The afternoon light filtering through the blinds painted pale stripes across the worn carpet. He dropped his keys onto the kitchen counter and sank into his chair. The place wasn't much. A one-bedroom apartment paid for by disability benefits. Cheap furniture, peeling paint, a refrigerator that hummed louder than it should. Still, it was his. He glanced toward the computer. The invitation from the eye was still there. Waiting. A sharp knock interrupted his thoughts. 3 quick raps. He frowned. Nobody ever visited. A second knock followed. Reluctantly, he got up and crossed the apartment. When he opened the door, 2 strangers stood in the hallway. A man and a woman. Both wore simple clothing and carried themselves with an unusual calm. Not salespeople. Not missionaries. Not quite. "Good afternoon," the woman said with a smile. He said nothing. "We're speaking with members of the community." "What community?" The man exchanged a glance with the woman. "The eye." The words immediately caught his attention. His expression must have changed, because the woman smiled wider. "You've heard of it?" "Maybe." "The eye is a place for people who feel trapped," she said. "Trapped by what?" the man answered. "Fear, isolation, expectations, the stories people tell themselves about who they are." The hallway fell silent. Something about their confidence unsettled him. They spoke as if they already knew him. "The eye offers something different," the woman continued. "What?" The man smiled. "Freedom." He almost laughed. "Freedom?" "True freedom." The woman nodded. "Freedom from fear. Freedom from loneliness. Freedom from the limitations that keep people asleep. Freedom from the slavery of slogans." The phrase struck him. Asleep. He thought about the dreams he dreaded every night, the endless pacing, the empty days, the invitation waiting on his computer. "What exactly is the eye?" he asked. Neither of them answered immediately. Instead, the woman handed him a small black card. On its surface was a single symbol, an eye, nothing else. No phone number, no website, no address, just the symbol. "The eye isn't a place you find," the man said quietly. "It's a place that finds you." The 2 strangers turned and began walking down the hallway. "Wait," he called after them. They stopped. "How did you know where I lived?" For the first time, neither of them smiled. Then they continued down the hall without answering. He stood frozen in the doorway. The black card felt strangely heavy in his hand. It was getting late. The apartment had grown dark around him. Outside, the streetlights cast long shadows across the parking lot, while inside the only illumination came from the pale glow of his monitor. He sat alone at his desk. The black card rested beside the keyboard. The invitation to the eye remained unopened. Hours passed. He watched videos, browsed forums, read the same conversations over and over without absorbing a word. The clock crept forward. 2:17 a.m., 2:41 a.m., 2:56 a.m. His eyes felt heavy, but he refused to sleep. Sleep meant dreams. Dreams meant demons. Then his monitor chimed. A notification appeared in the corner of the screen. He frowned. It wasn't from any application he recognized. No username, no profile picture, just a direct message. Slowly, he opened it. The sender's name was a single eye symbol. There was only one message: leave. He stared at the screen. The word remained. No explanation. No destination. No context. Just that single command. Leave. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He typed a reply. Who are you? The message failed to send. No error. No indication it had even been received. A few moments later, another message appeared. 3 a.m. The clock in the corner of his monitor read 2:58. His heart began to race. He looked around the apartment. The empty kitchen, the stained carpet, the unmade bed. The same walls he had stared at every day for years. The psychiatrist's voice echoed in his memory. Do one thing that's uncomfortable. The screen chimed again. A third message appeared. Freedom requires movement. The clock changed. 3 a.m. For several seconds he sat perfectly still. Then he stood, grabbed his jacket, and walked out the door. The stars were beautiful. I left without farewell, shedding the weight of my former life as a serpent sheds its skin. The apartment, the routines, the endless cycle of waking and sleeping, all of it receded behind me with each step. Moonlight bled silver across the narrow path ahead. The further I walked, the thinner the world became. Familiar landmarks dissolved into shadow and mist. The city seemed impossibly distant, as though it belonged to another life. Soon, I could no longer tell where I was, yet I felt no fear. Only a strange certainty. The road had long since abandoned civilization, and yet, paradoxically, I felt closer to the center of all things than I ever had before. The night air seemed alive. The stars hung overhead like countless watchful eyes. It was as if the universe had drawn a slow breath, and I had finally stepped inside it. Somewhere ahead, hidden beyond the darkness, something was waiting for me. And for the first time in years, I wanted to know what it was. The trees shuddered beneath the moonlight, their shadows stretching across the forest floor like trembling fingers. Time itself seemed to loosen, its familiar rhythm dissolving into the stillness of the night. Then it appeared. A solitary structure stood veiled among the trees. The Eye. Fashioned from glass and stone, it rose from the wilderness like a forgotten monument. Part planetarium, part library. It seemed suspended between the pursuit of knowledge and the contemplation of eternity. Its windows glimmered softly in the darkness, while above them a vast dome opened toward the heavens. At its summit, a great telescope pierced the night sky. It did not merely observe the stars. It seemed to challenge them, as though seeking to wound the heavens and drink from the secrets hidden beyond their light. Within the Eye dwelled an old man, who seemed less a resident than a fixture of the place itself, as though he had emerged from the stone and timber long ago and simply never left. His movements possessed the effortless certainty of one who had wandered its halls for centuries, memorizing every corridor, every shelf, every secret. The interior defied the proportions suggested by its exterior. Space unfolded in impossible ways, expanding beyond reason. Corridors stretched farther than they should, bending perception and dissolving any reliable sense of distance or direction. Even the silence felt animate, as though the building itself drew slow, measured breaths. Though modest in appearance from the outside, the Eye contained a vastness that bordered on the impossible. It felt less like a structure than a living repository of knowledge, a cavernous sanctuary whose depths seemed capable of swallowing entire worlds and preserving them among its endless shelves. I raised my hand toward the stars and felt their light settle upon my skin like a living breath. In that instant, time lost its coherence. Past sorrows, present longings, and futures, yet unborn, unraveled from their separate threads and flowed together into a single current. Memories I had buried resurfaced beside dreams I had never spoken aloud, while distant possibilities flickered at the edge of perception like half-remembered constellations. For a moment, I seemed to exist everywhere at once. The dome above me dissolved into an ocean of stars. The boundaries between sky and self, observer and observed, grew indistinct. Then the old man looked up. His eyes settled upon me with neither surprise nor concern, as though he had witnessed this moment countless times before. When he spoke, his voice carried through the vast chamber like an echo from a forgotten age. Soft, distant, and impossibly ancient. Yet despite its remoteness, every word seemed to arrive from somewhere deep within me, as though the voice had not crossed the room at all, as though it had crossed time itself. "You do not belong here," he murmured. "Those who wander these halls without understanding the risk slip into realms from which no living person may return." I did not answer. I could not. My attention had already been seized. A book lay upon the floor. It seemed impossibly out of place, as though reality itself had rejected it and left it stranded between worlds. Its cover shimmered at the edge of perception, refusing to remain fixed in shape or detail. Each time I tried to focus upon it, the image wavered, dissolving into uncertainty. Yet its presence exerted a terrible gravity. Something within me was drawn toward it. The only markings I could discern were 3 unfamiliar letters: A, U, and I. They meant nothing. A cold sensation crept up my spine. The room began to tilt. Around me, the vast interior of the eye seemed to breathe and expand. Above, the great glass dome revolved with impossible slowness, revealing a procession of stars that circled overhead like vast, indifferent eyes. The old man's voice grew distant. The shelves blurred. The floor dissolved beneath my feet. Darkness gathered at the edges of my vision, folding inward until it consumed the stars, the library, and finally the world itself. "Ah," she said softly, a faint smile touching her lips. "There he is, just as the legends described." The meadow fell silent. The priests standing around her lowered their eyes in quiet reverence, as though witnessing the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy. I stared at them, unsure whether I had awakened or merely entered another dream. The woman stepped forward through the flowers. She was younger than I expected, yet there was an ageless quality to her presence. The sunlight seemed reluctant to leave her, gathering around her white robes like a second garment. "The legends say that you speak English," she continued. "For that reason, I will address you in that tongue first." She paused. "But English is an old, natural language." The council exchanged knowing glances. "We prefer a newer, more modern language." She touched the pendant hanging at her throat, a symbol resembling an eye enclosed within a circle. A language closer to the foundations of thought itself. The wind stirred the flowers. "We speak in AUI." The word struck me like the echo of a forgotten memory. A UI. The same impossible letters I had seen upon the book, the same letters that had followed me into darkness. The woman's smile widened slightly. "It appears the language has already begun speaking to you." I glanced past the priestess toward the old man standing among the council. Unlike the others, he did not watch me with curiosity. His gaze carried the calm patience of someone who had already seen every question and every answer. "Is it true?" I asked. "They say you remember everything." A faint smile crossed his face. "Everything worth remembering." The council chuckled quietly. "No," the priestess said. "He means exactly what you think he means." "How is that possible?" The old man folded his hands behind his back. "It is a property of AUI." The word immediately commanded my attention. A UI is more than a language, he continued. It is a system for organizing thought itself. Every word is constructed from semantic primes, the fundamental elements of meaning from which all concepts emerge. There are 31. Semantic primes? The atoms of language. He knelt among the flowers and drew a circle in the soil. Take the semantic prime A. He pointed to the circle. It signifies space. The circle became the image of a world in my mind. When students learn AUI, they associate each prime with a vivid image. For A, we imagine the Earth, because K means world. He drew a second mark beside it, a spiral. I nodded slowly. Another semantic prime is E. It signifies movement. The old man traced a line through the dirt. Now consider GED, meaning vehicle. He looked up. What would a space vehicle be? A spaceship. Precisely. The old man's eyes brightened. In AUI, concepts are not arbitrary sounds. They are built from meaningful components. Each word becomes a mnemonic structure. Each structure becomes an image. Each image becomes a location within memory. The priestess smiled. I stared at him. You're saying the language itself helps you remember? It does more than help. He pointed toward the eye rising behind the meadow. The wind stirred the flowers. For 6 centuries I have studied the histories preserved within the eye. I blinked. 6 centuries. The old man smiled. I did not say I lived for 6 centuries. The council laughed softly. I said I studied 6 centuries of history. A brief silence followed. Then he gestured toward the observatory. Come. The great dome shimmered beneath the afternoon sun. You have questions. His eyes met mine. The old man studied me for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. You are wondering about companionship. I blinked. I didn't say that. No, he replied. You didn't. The council exchanged amused glances. The priestess folded her hands before her. Loneliness is one of the oldest afflictions known to humanity, she said. It has survived every empire, every revolution, every technological age. I found myself looking away. The old man continued. Here, relationships are not left entirely to chance. What does that mean? He gestured toward the council. When a member of the community wishes to seek a partner, the council offers guidance. Guidance. Wisdom, the priestess corrected gently. The flowers swayed in the breeze. We spend years studying personality, temperament, values, aspirations, fears, habits, and the countless subtleties that determine whether 2 lives may flourish together. I frowned. So you choose people's partners? The old man shook his head. No. His answer came immediately. We make recommendations. The priestess nodded. The choice always belongs to the individuals involved. And if they don't like each other? Then nothing happens. The old man's voice was calm. Both people possess a voice. Both possess the right to refuse. The council murmured in agreement. No one is compelled. The priestess stepped forward. Our purpose is not obedience. Our purpose is harmony. She looked toward the distant eye. We strive to help both people flourish. The old man smiled. Many societies ask what arrangement best preserves tradition. The priestess smiled as well. Others ask what arrangement maximizes freedom. A brief silence followed. We ask a different question. I waited. The old man looked directly into my eyes. What arrangement gives 2 human beings the greatest opportunity for happiness? The meadow fell silent. For a moment, even the wind seemed to pause among the flowers. In time, the council introduced me to a woman named Robu. In English, her name meant harmony. At first, the arrangement felt strange. We spent months talking beneath the glass dome of the eye, wandering its gardens, and sharing long conversations that stretched deep into the night. The council had recommended us to one another, but the choice had always been ours. And so, slowly, we chose. Years passed. The memory of my old life began to fade, not through forgetting, but because it was overshadowed by something greater. The days acquired a rhythm. The mornings belonged to sunlight and laughter. The evenings belonged to books, conversations, and the quiet comfort of another presence beside me. What surprised me most was how ordinary happiness appeared when it finally arrived. There were no revelations, no visions, no celestial voices, only countless small moments whose value revealed itself with time. A hand finding mine in the dark, a shared smile across a crowded room, the certainty that someone was waiting for me when I returned home. Then came our children. The first transformed me. The second astonished me. The third convinced me that the human heart possesses a greater capacity for love than reason can explain. Each child arrived as an entirely new universe. Each carried their own questions, dreams, fears, and wonders. And each, in their own way, made me happier than I had believed possible. There had been a time when I feared sleep, a time when loneliness seemed permanent, a time when I wandered through life, convinced that meaning belonged to other people. Now, when I stood beneath the stars with my family gathered around me, those years felt impossibly distant. The eye had offered me knowledge. A you, I had offered me understanding, but neither compared to the gift of belonging. Sometimes, late at night, I would watch Robe U laughing with our children beneath the observatory lights and think of the frightened man who had once left his apartment at 3 a.m. If I could have spoken to him then, I would have told him only this: keep walking. The road is longer than you think, and somewhere ahead, happiness is waiting. The years passed with a gentleness that neither of us noticed until they were gone. The children grew. Seasons came and departed. The gardens around the eye flourished and faded 100 times over. And through it all, Robe U remained beside me. The love of youth burned brightly, but it was restless. It desired, sought, and reached outward. The love that came later was different, deeper, quieter. It settled into the foundations of our lives until it became difficult to distinguish where one ended and the other began. We no longer needed many words. A glance was often enough. A shared silence could contain entire conversations. When we walked together through the meadows surrounding the eye, I sometimes felt as though we were 2 notes within the same song rather than 2 separate people. Our bodies aged, our hair silvered, our steps became slower, yet something within us continued to grow. The old man had once told me that every human relationship possesses a hidden center. Most people spend their lives circling it, he had said. A fortunate few eventually arrive. Only in old age did I understand what he meant. There were evenings when Robe U and I sat beneath the glass dome, watching the stars drift across the heavens. We would sit for hours without speaking. And yet, I never felt alone. Quite the opposite. I felt united with her in a way that seemed to transcend language itself. The boundaries between self and other grew strangely transparent. Her joys felt like my own. Her sorrows felt like my own. Even her memories seemed to echo within me. It was not possession, nor dependence. It was communion, a quiet spiritual intimacy that had been forged through decades of shared experience, sacrifice, forgiveness, and love. Looking back, I could scarcely remember the lonely young man who had wandered into the forest searching for answers. The life I had found was richer than anything I could have imagined, and as we sat together beneath the stars, our hands intertwined and our children grown, I realized that happiness had never been a destination. It had been a companionship, a journey taken side by side, and there was no one in all the worlds I would rather have shared it with than Robiu. Then the world began to spin. The stars blurred into streaks of light. The gardens of the eye dissolved into a whirl of color and memory. I reached for Robiu's hand, but even her face seemed to drift beyond my grasp. A strange darkness gathered at the edge of my vision, and once more I began to fall. I awoke on cold earth, screaming her name. "Robu!" The word tore itself from my throat again and again. Footsteps approached, voices, hands grabbing my shoulders. I struggled to explain, but the only language that came was AUI. The words poured out in frantic bursts. To me, they were perfectly clear. To them, they were gibberish. "Sir, slow down. Can you understand me? What's your name?" The language sounded strangely familiar. English. The realization struck with terrible force. The old world. I had returned to the old world. I looked down at my trembling hands. They were not the hands of a young man. They were old, wrinkled, weathered by decades. My breath caught in my throat. The years had not been a dream. They had happened. Every conversation, every child, every sunset beneath the dome, every moment with Robiu. Gone. "What is your name, sir?" I closed my eyes. The answer came automatically. "Eric." They took me to a hospital. The buildings were different. The people were different. Even the city felt unfamiliar. I learned that my parents had died years ago. My psychiatrist had retired. The forums and communities where I had once spent my days had vanished from the internet. One by one, every thread connecting me to my former life had been severed. The doctors told me I had been living alone. The police found no observatory, no council, no priestess, no record of Robiu. Only an aging man found wandering in distress. Everyone believed they were helping me. How could I explain that my grief was real? How could I explain that I was mourning an entire lifetime? I stopped speaking about the eye. I stopped speaking about AUI. I stopped speaking about Robiu. No one believed me anyway. At night I would lie awake and replay her face in my mind, terrified that memory itself might eventually fail. Years earlier, loneliness had driven me into a state hospital. Now, loneliness had returned, deeper than before. Because this time, I knew exactly what had been lost, and no medicine in the world could give it back.